I myself prefer not to use a textbook for a couple of reasons. One is, I think if you try to cover the whole field of philosophy, you'll just be getting such tiny little bites of any particular philosophy that the students will not really get a sense of what it is to be a philosopher. You know, so I prefer to use just several source books. I don't even like to use an anthology because, again, you're getting so many different philosophers. You're not really getting what it's like to be a philosopher, okay? And another reason I don't want to use it is that a textbook, again, is kind of dumbed down. There can be excellent textbooks, but it's still it's still not a case of doing philosophy or seeing how somebody else does philosophy. You're just getting an account of philosophy, somebody talking about philosophy. But I want my students to become philosophers.
Right.
You see?
And just for me, can you define what that means to you, becoming a philosopher?
Sure. Of course I can, Dave. You kidding? Tell me when to stop, Dave.
Right. Fine.
Right, but I can, of course, give you the 2-minute version of that.
Oh, I heard that 45-minute version if you want.
Oh, okay.
That's interesting too.
To be a philosopher is to think, well, again, first of all, let me give you the standard caveat that in philosophy, everything is up for grabs. Everything is debatable. Everything is debatable. So I'm just giving you my account of what philosophy, and even my account can change over time, has changed over time, has various components to it, all right? So even I would have perhaps 2 very different conceptions of philosophy. The main conception of philosophy that I stress in my teaching, because it's pretty much mainstream, and I feel I have a professionally ethical responsibility to teach my introductory students what is considered mainstream. The mainstream view of philosophy, as I understand it, is that it is the rational thinking about fundamental questions. Fundamental questions or fundamental assumptions. If one examines in one's own mind what are the most fundamental thoughts that one has that one would never think normally in everyday life to question, one's most basic assumptions, so basic that it might be considered insanity to question them, so basic that one is usually not even aware that one has them as assumptions. Such as...
What is love? That kind of thing you're talking about?
Well, what is love is a question. What is a fundamental assumption you might have about love? Give me an example.
Love is derived from social and cultural norms. Is that what you're talking about? Something like that?
Is that a fundamental assumption of yours, David?
No. I just made that up.
Well, you see, no. A fundamental assumption of
mind. So it's got to be a fundamental assumption of the individual.
Of the individual, or the culture, or the world, or of humanity, that you think is a fundamental assumption of humanity, all right?
All right, so I'll give you one. One of mine would be that you can look at the world in a linear way or a non-linear way.
Okay.
And the world seen in either one of those ways becomes different.
Okay, now you're using technical terms which a constant listener of the professors would understand, but somebody just tuning in now would have no notion of. So why don't, since we don't want to get too sidetracked.
Right. I'm not, I don't want to
I'm trying to answer.
Yeah, right.
Why don't you give an example of a fundamental assumption you have that does not contain jargon?
All right.
Do you have it?
I love my wife. I love my wife. There you go.
Excellent. I'm not going to touch that. All right. Excellent.
All right. What about...
what is an even more fundamental? Is there possibly, conceivably, an assumption even more fundamental?
You're going to say, am I alive?
Exactly.
That kind of
but what's the assumption?
The assumption is that I am alive.
Exactly. Perfect. Okay. So I'm saying that philosophy is an examination of fundamental assumptions of that nature, such as that I am alive, I exist. I exist is a fundamental assumption that just about everybody has, and it would never even occur to them that they have that as an assumption, because they would never pause in their daily life to reflect on that assumption, right? It's just an assumption that they have. But philosophy is the peculiar discipline that tries to first make us aware of our most fundamental assumptions, and then, even more peculiarly, asks us to question them to say, oh, do I exist? Philosophy is the discipline that turns a fundamental assumption into a question. Oh, do I exist? And why does it do that?
The reason why you always say that I'm a philosopher is that I ask questions about fundamental assumptions.
Exactly.
I never knew that.
Exactly, David. That you just
right
on the ball there. All right.
That definition.
And why does philosophy ask us to question our most fundamental assumptions? Because it wants to try to justify them rationally, although again there could be a different tradition of philosophy that I also am very sympathetic to, which would not to ask us to try to rationalize our assumptions, but would still ask us to reflect upon them, to meditate upon them, not necessarily in the standard rational, logical way, but in perhaps a mystical way, or just a meditative way.
Okay, in other words, when you say justify your fundamental assumptions in a rational way,
yes,
are you saying that there's some kind of a universally held view on how to do that?
That is a fundamental assumption of one kind of philosophy, which philosophy itself could question, all right, and does question, right? But certainly a fundamental assumption of standard Western, so-called Western philosophy, is that there is a universal method of reasoning, rationality, and logic, by which any issue, question, assumption may be reflected upon, analyzed, assessed, judged, evaluated. And so it could turn out, and I can discuss that with you also, if you would like, the particulars of that rational method. But the upshot then is supposed to be, well, could be several upshots. One would be that you recognize that one of your fundamental assumptions is not justified.
Not rational.
Not rationally justified.
Not rational.
Right.
But it may be, could it be justified and be reflection, or what did you say,
reflected upon, meditated upon? Yes. It might be that you conclude that it is not justifiable. That's to say, in rational terms, you cannot think of any way that it could be justified rationally, but nonetheless you might think it has merit, and so you might ponder whether there is some alternative way of justifying it other than the standard rational way. And this, of course, could lead to an examination of rationality itself, whether rationality itself is justifiable. That could be questioned. That could seem question-begging. How could rationality be rationalized? You know, some would say it can't be. Some would say the rational method is simply something that one subscribes to on faith, and if one chooses not to, that is equally justifiable in some irrational sense, some sense that transcends rationality itself, because ultimately rationality itself cannot be justified rationally, because that would just be circular justification, which is not rational justification. I'm going off on a tangent there. But anyway, getting back to rational justification, the upshot of examining one's most fundamental assumptions rationally could be that one discovers that some of one's most fundamental assumptions are not justified. In your own, by your own lights, you might conclude that something you have been assuming all your life is not justified, and perhaps not even justifiable, and you yourself should reject it and seek some alternative, or maybe you come immediately to recognize that some alternative is justified. And so you change your mind about something very fundamental. Or you could find yourself in a state of suspense, you might say, where you're not sure anymore what is the truth, something that you had held as a fundamental assumption all your life. You now continue to question. It's not that you have any alternative ready to hand, and you may not even be ready to reject your starting assumption. You just don't know. You now find yourself in a state of skepticism or doubt, a state of doubt. And that could have the beneficial upshot. David is pointing at me, so I'll put my glasses on. Ah, yes, David says, slow down. Why did you give it to me? Oh, you wanted to be professional. Yes,
no, I just
and not just say slow down.
Why would I pass judgment on my buddy?
What?
Why would I pass judgment that you should slow down?
Oh, is that a judgment?
Don't you think it's a judgment?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
I mean, don't you think?
Yeah. I see. David is asking me to pause and reflect for a moment.
No. I'm asking you to go slower for the listener.
Right. But
because you're going
saying,
fast, I can follow you.
Right. Okay. But you said you're still leaving it up to me.
Yeah, of course.
Right. David is suggesting to me that I speak more slowly.
Well, I go off and running. I hear myself.
Good advice.
I do a video by myself, and I go off and running, and I can't slow myself down. I can't slow myself down.
Right. No, I can.
You can.
I can.
The only way I was able to slow myself down was to have an interpreter and give a sentence, and then they interpret, and then I talk to them.
Right. No, that's always good advice. You know, I was doing it because I was trying not to go off on a tangent, but of course it's too late now, folks. We should call this show
Tangents.
That would be a great name.
That is a clever one. Yeah, it is clever.
Yeah. Because that's what we do.
Yeah,
because all the real wisdom is to be found in tangents.
Yeah, I like that. Let's change the name.
Okay, but wait a minute. But see, now I've lost my...
All right, I got you right here.
Yeah, what was I saying? What was I saying?
They're talking about justification, and should something be justified, and it could be justified or it could be rejected.
Oh, yes. Yes.
I'm taking notes.
An alternative beneficial outcome of reflecting upon things rationally, even if one doesn't come to any definite conclusion about what one is reflecting upon, is that it could make one more tolerant of other ideas. It could first make one aware that there are many other ideas at the level of fundamental assumptions, and then it could even make one curious about them and even possibly receptive to some of them that at first one wasn't even aware of, and secondly, if one was aware of, one might have been completely unsympathetic to. But now,
okay, now what do you mean receptive? Now, what would be a philosopher's, I don't want to say goal, but of helping someone be more receptive to other ideas? What would be a manifestation of that receptiveness?
Well, I mean, everybody has ideas that they just reject out of hand or just oppose. Like, recently we've all been immersed in political stuff, where you're for this and you're against that. But if you suddenly are introduced to a line of thought that casts doubt upon your own deeply held views, whether they be philosophical in nature, political in nature, economic in nature, emotional in nature, whatever, aesthetic in nature, whatever, then you might suddenly be in a state of mind where you could be more sympathetic or at least more open to hear what the former opposition has to say.
Okay, could you though, I just think of this when you said it, could you not understand the idea and still be receptive to the idea?
Oh, aha.
That's what I'm thinking.
Oh, well, yes,
so you're assuming that receptiveness comes from the idea of dialogue and knowing the idea.
No. At first I meant an openness. That's why I used the word openness. You might now, for the first time in your life, be ready to really listen more closely to what others are saying about things that you had rejected out of hand. Because, if you reject something out of hand, you are not going to become immersed in it. You're not going to explore it. You're not going to have that motivation, that curiosity that will bring you to listen to what the other folks have to say, or to explore their literatures, etc., etc. So obviously, I mean, okay, for example, right? You and I grew up in the Cold War, during the Cold War, and we were just told communism is bad and blah, 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 right? So most of us certainly never stopped to study the theory of communism, the philosophy of communism, what is it anyway, to read the great works of communism and so forth and so forth. We just didn't do that, right? Well, if at some point one suddenly became wary of capitalism, maybe one becomes unemployed and then, suddenly starts to have second thoughts about how wonderful capitalism is, then for the first time you might want to explore communism. You've been against it all your life, but you didn't really know what it was, So you might start to read up on it and so forth and so forth, and all of a sudden it might start to make a great deal of sense to you. Now, I should also point out that most likely those of us caught up in capitalism and opposed to communism during the Cold War, most likely, most of us didn't really know about capitalism either.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Right?
Including myself.
So in exploring the nature of communism, now that you've become unemployed, you might at the same time learn things about capitalism that you didn't know about before. I mean, clearly the communists have a lot to say about capitalism. So in reading about, in fact, Karl Marx's great book was called Das Kapital, right?
What does Das mean? Something capital.
I don't know, now that you mention it.
Das.
Maybe in German they put an article before something we wouldn't put an article before. I don't know.
Yeah.
But so there you would be learning about it. But then you could turn to the classic works by by capitalists' favorite theorists, Adam Smith, etc., John Stuart Mill, probably, etc. Then you'd be learning about capitalism. So for the first time, you would be involved in a dialogue.
An internal dialogue.
An internal dialogue, yeah. A personal dialogue. To just explore something that you have assumed all your life, and at the same time, in the nature of dialogue, you would be getting introduced to what the opposition had to say also. And it's like starting from scratch, It's not that when you become aware of and examine your fundamental assumptions that you're just rejecting them by doing that. No. You're just bringing them out into the open so that they can be, so that you can engage them in a dialogue with alternative assumptions and points of view, and then may the best ideas win. You may continue this dialogue the rest of your life.
I gotta stop you right there. Now, I know you were talking quickly, okay?
Was I?
No, but may the best ideas
Right, good
win.
to pick up on that, Dave. Good. Yes, because, of course, that begs a huge question. How does one determine what is the best? Or is there even such a thing as the best?
Or, another one would be,
see, we are questioning
have the current people come up with the best that we're discussing to select the best.
Right, maybe the best idea has
not been thought of yet.
Right, David, you are on the ball, as always, because David is a true philosopher.
Oh, I don't know.
And our listeners and viewers are now seeing philosophy in action. As much as I would encourage all of our listeners and viewers to pick up a book by Plato at their first opportunity, or any of the other great philosophers, they are being exposed to bona fide philosophy, as, if I may humbly say so, as good as any philosophy in the history of the discipline, just by listening to the professors.
No.
Because Socrates himself would, and the Buddha himself would be the first to say that any individual human being is as capable of philosophizing as they were. So I humbly submit from my many years of exposure to the discipline, I humbly submit that the dialogues that David and I engage in, and with our guests on the professors, are as good as the dialogues and the philosophy that one would read by picking up any of the classic texts. And I would encourage everybody to pick up all the classic texts and read them and ponder them. But I would also encourage our viewers to take this program as seriously as they would take any of those classic texts. And I would encourage any of our listeners and viewers to engage in their own philosophical dialogues in the privacy of their own crania, or cranii, whichever is the plural of cranium, and with anybody else they care to talk to, whether it be a stranger, a classmate, a significant other, family member, friend, whatever. Or, like Socrates, go into the marketplace, the agora, and confront the so-called experts. If you're taking a class, ask the questions of your teacher. If there's a guest speaker, if you go to a lecture by a speaker, confront the speaker with your questions. If you meet a politician, engage in a dialogue with the politician, and so forth.
One of the challenges is, I believe, is when you say the word confront, I think this has been construed by the mass media and by television and all that in terms of debate and all that.
Yeah.
Confront means to aggressively argue your position.
Yes.
Now, I think
have
the way
used that word.
But I'm saying that it means to aggressively hold and argue your position.
Yeah. Which is okay, but I just don't want people to get the impression that that's the only way to engage in dialogue. So confrontation would be a subspecies of dialogue.
Yeah, but I would think that confrontation would actually deter from
Well,
in a
it
sense.
can, but sometimes
because you're not really trying. You're not trying to change your mind. You're trying to. Well, neither person is trying to change their mind.
Well, again, that's a great observation. No, there are several ways one can engage in dialogue. Okay, sometimes the best philosophical way to do it is for the sake of trying to reach truth. Of course, there's an assumption there that such a thing is reachable, or at least that trying to reach it is a good thing to do.
Now, do we assume that neither has truth at that moment?
We might assume that at that moment nobody knows who has truth,
or neither
of the interlocutors knows for sure if he or she is in possession of the truth. But the primary goal and dedication of the dialogue there would be truth. So but another type of dialogue is one in which you believe you are in possession of the truth, and you are trying to persuade somebody who has a different opinion from you that they're wrong. But that's I would still consider that to be legitimate dialogue, so long as one is prepared to listen to the interlocutor, one's interlocutor, such that if your interlocutor comes up with a good argument, a good point, you will listen and recognize that it is within the realm of conceivability that you might change or at least modify your own position, even though you have engaged in the dialogue for the purpose of trying to change the other person's mind. A third type of...
Okay, could you repeat the second one again? I wrote it down, but I scribbled it and I couldn't get it right. It says, I'll tell you what I wrote. You are in possession and... You
believe you are in possession of the truth.
Okay.
And you are trying to change somebody else's mind. Okay. Oh, footnote to the first type of dialogue, where what you seek is, where your dedication is to truth, not just trying to convince somebody that you're right. A footnote to that is that you can be conducting that dialogue in your own mind, as well as with somebody else. Okay. A third type of dialogue is where you are debating something in front of an audience.
To yourself or to someone else? I mean,
Well,
terminated debate?
typically with somebody else. They're two people debating, you know, in front of an audience, and what you're trying to do is get the audience
I see
to
that,
agree with you.
Right.
And that I consider to be I guess I've given you these three types of dialogue in order of descending legitimacy, in my opinion. This is the least worthy type of dialogue. It's the kind you see on talk shows and everything, probably.
Right.
Because there, I think you don't even need to be convinced of your own position. You're just arguing it for the sake of winning, as it were.
Yeah. There's a name for that they had in.
Well, there's sophistry.
Sophistry.
I don't know. That's not really what sophistry is, but sophists would typically engage in that type of debate.
Okay, I got debating to, and get them to agree with you. Debating to who? To another person.
Yeah.
And get the audience to agree with you, right?
The third is get the audience to agree. Well, not necessarily agree with you. Well, okay, agree with you, but with the caveat there that you yourself don't necessarily believe it. So, like, for example, a politician.
Okay.
You know.
So you when you're in this, this is called debate. When you're in this, then you don't actually have to. It's the lawyer idea. You don't have to actually believe the person is innocent or guilty. You just argue.
Or the politician. You know, you yourself may not believe it at all. You're trying to get elected. You know, you're trying to get somebody to buy something, or da-da-da-da. But you could be a complete hypocrite. So you're just coming up with arguments to try to sway
which one would be
people.
that you believed it was true? The second one or the first one? The second one? Is there one where you actually believe it's true?
The second one, would clearly, you are believing it's true, and you're trying to persuade the other person, convince the other person that it's true. In the first one...
So the second one, you do believe what you're saying. You have to believe what you're saying to be in that. So the third one, you do not have to believe.
Again, you don't have to be, I would say typically, because again, you could just be trying to put something over on somebody, to get them to give you something, etc., etc. But I had in mind a case where you're pretty convinced that something is true, and you're just trying to get somebody else to believe it's true.
Right.
But you're open to the possibility that they could convince you to change your mind, or at least give you pause.
Now, when you say change your mind, would changing your mind for your own personal self-protection be considered changing your mind? Let's say that, let's say you say...
even though you don't really
even though you don't believe it.
Well, no, that's not, that's changing your mind about whether you should be, no, look, what I meant by changing your mind was what you actually believe.
All right.
Not just talking strategy here, what you actually believe. But yeah, there could be any number of different variations on these themes, Dave. We could enumerate, 50 different types of dialogue if we wanted to. I was just trying to give you what I thought were three main types.
No, I understand that. But when you say, for instance, there have been times in my life where I've not changed my mind, but I said, okay, I changed my mind.
Oh, well, I see. Sure.
You see what I mean? Okay.
Yeah.
Because I don't think I can win, or it's just not.
I witnessed you doing that the other night.
Yeah, you did. Yeah.
Right. When it was a social situation, and you kind of got to the point where you realized you were not going to convince the other person, no matter what. In other words, the other person was not engaging in dialogue with a sufficiently open mind that in the way that I've just characterized this second type of dialogue, where you are indeed trying to convince somebody else of your position, but you are still open to the possibility that they might say something that could alter your opinion. The person you were having a discussion with the other night was simply, because of the person's personality,
I wouldn't say it. Maybe
never, not ever capable of changing his mind.
About anything?
About certain types of things.
Certain areas, okay, you're right. All right, so...
Because of his personality, because of his experiences. And we're all like that. With
I don't say that's bad.
Like, nobody is ever going to make me think Hitler was okay. Right? Nobody. It's just... Or nobody's ever going to make me... But they could. I could hold out that somebody could convince me that flying saucers exist, even though I now reject it out of hand. But it's not at the same level as Hitler was a bad guy. You see, Now, as a philosopher, I would have to recognize that there could be a legitimate philosophical debate about was Hitler worthy and were his ideas worthy. I would have to recognize that, and I myself could engage in such a dialogue, all right? And I guess I would do it with, I would think I was doing it with an open mind.
Right.
All right, such that it's within the realm of conceivability that somebody could convince me that Hitler was worthy and his ideas were worthy in the most general sense. Worthy.
Worthy of going to heaven? Worthy of what? I mean, what is it?
That he was right and we were wrong.
Oh, is that what that means,
okay.
worthy?
Well, that's how I'm using the word. Okay. But it's a belief that I hold so fundamentally that he was evil. All right?
Yeah.
That I just don't, I think if you really think we're going to engage in a discussion where you're actually going to change my mind about that, chances are pretty close to nil.
Now, if this is true,
if what is true,
that there are issues that we will not change our mind on, maybe one in a trillion chance.
Yes.
Are we then incapable of entering into a philosophical discussion in terms of that issue?
Well, that's a very good question, and I would say that, again, just off the top of my head, answer to you now is that if one can cultivate the philosophical temperament,
right?
That's to say, as I understand the philosophical temperament, one can engage such a person in a genuine philosophical dialogue. Okay, what do I mean by a philosophical temperament? Philosophical temperament, that is the personality that is capable of considering any arguments that might occur to oneself or that somebody else might present to one in a calm, rational way, considering the arguments on their merits, even though one is convinced ahead of time that one will reject their conclusion. The philosophical temperament would still be willing to entertain those arguments, granted for the biased purpose of trying to see what's wrong with them.
Well, that's not an argument then, is it? If you're trying to see what's wrong with it?
You mean that's not a dialogue? Of course
well, I don't
it
know.
is.
I'm asking.
Of course
I don't know.
it is. Why not?
All right.
That's a critical dialogue. That's dialectic.
So you enter into the dialogue trying to find...
Critically.
Critical. So
yes.
Critical means for your own ideas too. Then you're.
Oh, absolutely. Because in the very act of presenting your arguments for your position, you are opening yourself up to criticism by others.
Right. Of
You
course.
see, as opposed to just expressing your opinions, that's not a critical act at all, because you're not giving anybody an opportunity to try to, as it were, undermine your position if you're not letting them in on the bases for your opinion.
Yeah, so critical is not necessarily critical of others. It's critical in the sense of ourselves.
Right. It's having an open mind.
To listen.
Oh, sure. Critical is a wonderful concept.
Yeah, we don't. The way
we use it in a degraded sense in everyday speech.
Yeah, maybe because we don't want the idea of dialogue. Or we don't want the idea of a philosophical temperament. Right. That can engage in dialogue.
Right. You are listening to the Professors, a.k.a. Tangents, broadcasting on WNHU-West Haven, 88.7 FM from the campus of the University of New Haven, broadcasting every week live on the greatest radio station in the universe. David, continue, please.
All right, now here's my dilemma with what you're saying is, you keep adding the word rational. And when you add the word rational, it adds assumptions to that.
It adds
assumptions now.
It does.
And so my idea is, if you had two people discussing two religions, and they were both discussing them in the sense of trying to discuss the values, and maybe one would have a more appropriate value to the person at that time in their life, you couldn't suggest that their discussion of religions, could you, would be based on a rational, their perception, the philosopher's perception of rational discussion.
Why not, Dave?
Well, I think you
First
could.
of all,
But the word
there's a
rational
whole
again
discipline
has
known
been
as theology,
right.
which, again, I'm not a theologian,
I'm
so I
not either.
speak here as an outsider and an amateur, but my
Mhm.
impression of theology is that it is precisely the rational examination of religion.
Hmm.
That's what theology is, as it were, philosophy of religion.
All right. So if you were discussing, if you were
Not,
in a
excuse me,
philosophical,
philosophy of religion is the philosophical examination of the nature of religion in general,
Right.
typically, all
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Theology is probably more typically the philosophical, rational exploration of a particular religion.
Mhm.
But it could also, of course, be a rational examination of the nature of religion in general.
But when it goes
Because
into the
each
philosophers-
religion, each particular religion, probably has a unique conception of what religion is. For
Right,
example,
right.
the religion of Buddhism
Right.
does not even contain God.
Right, or heaven.
Whereas the religion of Christianity would presumably, well, I guess would say that something which doesn't have God in it isn't even a religion.
Well, God
not to
is
mention
first
that
cause.
it's not
First
Christianity. But I
First
don't
cause.
know. Maybe there are some Christian theologians who would say that, oh, no, the Christian religion must have God in it, but a religion could still be a religion if it didn't have God in it. That
I don't
would be
know
an
if
interesting.
we
I'd
do
love
that
to
unless,
discuss that
Yeah,
with
that
a
would be.
Christian
I think the
theologian or a
Christian
Jewish theologian.
I think the Christian theologian does not see any religion that doesn't have a monotheistic God in it, not just a God in the sense of many gods.
Right.
So a Christian theology, in my view, would have to have the idea of monotheistic religion based on one.
Yeah, but I don't know, because
Supreme
again,
being.
you know, theologians are deep thinkers.
No, I mean,
right? They're
I'm just saying
philosophers,
that.
and so it wouldn't surprise me if there are Christian
Oh, I'm
theologians
sure there are
who
some
would,
that.
yeah,
You know, everything is everywhere.
right.
But
right.
when you come to the idea of rational, and then you switch to the idea that, so you're going from philosophical temperament.
Yeah.
Would you change the word to theological temperament also? So would there be a theological?
Well, no, maybe I think what you're
philosophy
getting
of
at
religion.
is there. Well, could I put it this way, Dave? Would you allow me to put it
Yeah,
this
of
way?
course.
Could there be a philosophical temperament which is not simply a rational temperament?
Okay, yeah.
Which could perhaps
right.
have a rational philosopher as a subspecies, you know.
Mm-hmm.
A rational philosopher could have the philosophical temperament, but a non-rational philosopher could also have the philosophical temperament. Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah, right.
Okay. I think the answer would be yes. For example, off the top of my head, again, I personally am very sympathetic to the idea of a non-rational or irrational philosophical methodology that incorporates some form of mysticism or meditation, which in a religious context might be called prayer or meditation. And because meditation, even in English, you know, has this dual meaning to it, or dual denotations, connotations. It could suggest, on the one hand, rational reflection, discursive, rational, verbal reflection, but meditation can also suggest non-verbal, non-rational, or irrational sort of mystical pondering or thinking.
Let me ask you this now. I don't
mode of
think,
thought, mode of consciousness, to use a more general term.
but when I come up with anything that I'm saying, I don't consider anything I've ever said as a rational argument.
As a rational
Or as rational.
Well, you could mean that in two different ways. You could mean irrational, or you could mean non or irrational. Which do you mean?
Probably, it depends on, but it could be both. But I'm saying when I suggest to you, like I said earlier today, or we were discussing that discussion the other night, which I was happy to participate in, but my reasoning behind terminating the conversation, I don't think was rational in any way.
Oh, Dave. Okay, let me explain what I mean by rational.
Okay,
because I think you are
okay.
very rational, Dave.
All right, okay.
All right? Rational and don't know it.
Yeah. I'm rational and I don't
Okay,
know it.
first of all, the most fundamental sense of rational, from the root word ratio, is just reason, to give a reason.
Oh, give
a reason. Or, and to expect other people to present reasons to you for things, to expect there to be reasons for things, for why something should be believed. That is the most fundamental sense of rational, to be prepared to give reasons for what you believe, to expect other people to give reasons for what they believe.
Oh, I see.
Or just more generally to expect there to be reasons for believing things, okay? Now, beyond, going a step beyond, and you, Dave, do that all the time. You are always ready to give reasons
Yeah, but I
for
don't
what
think
you
you're
believe.
rational.
Well, but the very fact that you're giving reasons right there tells us that you are already in a certain basic sense rational. All right, now, okay, then there's the more technical sense, which is that the reasons are intended to satisfy certain standards of rationality or logic,
Yeah, right.
certain criteria of logic, all right? And again, Dave, and this comes, I suppose, from Aristotle, the idea that humans are, by definition, rational beings, in the sense that we all have this innate, intuitive sense of logic. If for example, if Dave, you don't go around saying things like, I think that marketing textbooks are a form of brainwashing.
No, I do say that.
Now, let me finish
All
my
right,
sentence, Dave.
Okay, go ahead.
Slow down,
All right,
Dave. Now, let me repeat,
all right.
because we've all lost our train of thought.
Okay.
Okay? That's an odd expression, lose our train. One can miss a train, but can one lose a train? Anyway, maybe I'm taking train to mean the mechanical kind of train, but this means a different type of train. But then it's not a metaphor anymore. Tangents, remember, that's another name of our program. I was saying, Dave, that you don't typically say things like, marketing textbooks are nothing but brainwashing.
Right.
And I believe that because bananas are yellow. See, you don't go around saying things like that, do you, Dave?
No.
See, because when you give a reason for something, it's rational in the sense of attempted to conform to certain standards of logic, which means that there's a certain kind of relevance that obtains between the reason you give and what it is a reason for. Now, there's absolutely no relevance between the yellowness of bananas and the claim that marketing textbooks are nothing but brainwashing. You see? So you not only give reasons for things, Dave, you give reasons that have a certain kind of relevance to what they're reasons for. And that is really what logic is all about. Now, the discipline of logic gives very precise rules that try to codify what counts as relevance.
What would count as a relevant
again,
argument or discussion?
Yeah, and these rules are so fundamental that even you, David, would agree to them. You would say, yes, that's right, that makes sense. For example, what is perhaps the most fundamental rule of logic, called modus ponens, is, to put it in symbolic terms, if, premise 1, if A then B, premise 2, A, conclusion B. For example, if today is Friday, then tomorrow is Saturday. Premise 2, today is Friday, therefore, David?
I've never figured this out. Therefore, A is right, or one of them is right, right? Is this it?
Dave,
See, I've got it written down. Okay.
Whoa,
If
great.
a-
Come, our special guest
I
again
took that
today.
class with you.
All right. Therefore,
Tomorrow is Saturday.
excellent.
Yeah, but you
Now-
see, I couldn't come up with that.
Oh, come on. Give me a break. Dave, let's do this again, Dave.
All right, yeah.
Premise one, all right?
Yeah, okay.
All right. Dave, I'm trying to convince you of something.
All right, okay, I understand.
Now, your task now is to figure out what I'm trying to convince
Okay,
you of, okay?
okay.
Now, let me give you my reasons,
Okay.
all right? And then you tell me what I'm trying to persuade you to believe with these reasons, okay? If today is Friday, then tomorrow is Saturday. Do you agree with that, Dave?
Right, yes.
All right, okay? And today is Friday, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Do you agree with that?
Yes.
All right, what am I trying to persuade you to believe now?
Tomorrow's Saturday.
George, he's got it. That's
Okay.
all we mean by the standards, the canons of the rules of logic and rationality.